Fantastic. So good afternoon now, everybody. Welcome along. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is our conversation on the 5 top tips to manage bias in difficult conversations. I've got a series of slides to share with you all. Now, just to be conscious, we've only got 45 minutes, so it's a high-level introduction to 5 things that I think that you could really benefit from keeping in mind when you're going into difficult conversations. And anything, to be honest, any kind of situations that might come your way. So I'm keeping it kind of higher level, but if you have got a burning question or it sparks something within you that you need a more specific answer to, I've popped a QR code in one of the end slides so that you can book a call with me if there's something you think, actually, I'd like to have a conversation about that, and this might not be the forum. So just know that that is there for you. And if you're watching this, obviously on a recording, on a catch up, then there will be a link as well that will come out with the PDF slides that will follow. So all of the slides as well will come out to you with notes included. So if you're someone who furiously takes a lot of notes, that's great. You can still do that. But I have also captured some for you of the highlights of things I think you should probably need to know so that you don't have to worry about missing anything. So all of that will come out to everybody who has signed up and registered for this session. So that's kind of the ground rules. I will start sharing now. Okay, if someone can give me a thumbs up, please, to let me know that they can see that, that would be amazing. Thank you, Joe. Wonderful. So what I would like as we begin this, if you can just kind of think to yourselves, please, what is it that you would like to get out of this session? Because I think it's always really handy when we join webinars is that we actually have something in the back of our mind about, actually, this is the reason that I've joined. So that when we kind of get towards the end, you can think, was that need met? And have I got something out of this that I thought was useful? Because obviously for me, that's really important. I want to make sure that you're getting something that is of value and of use based upon what you were bringing when you started this. So have a think about what it was when you signed up to this that you thought, oh yeah, actually, I'd like to know that. And if it is just general curiosity, that's perfect too. So that makes my job even easier, to be honest. So what is the plan for the day? I am in this next 45 minutes, or 40 minutes now, will run through with you who I am, because I know some of you won't be familiar with that, but some of you, thank you very much, who are my usual joiners, will definitely know who I am. So sorry that you will hear this all over again. But just run with you who I am and what I do. This isn't a sales webinar. This is simply me sharing information with you, but it's also a bit of a miss if I don't take the opportunity to explain to you who I am and how I work with people, just in case that is something that you might find of interest. Of course, then we've got 5 top tips that I'm going to share with you about managing bias when we have conversations. And then any time that we've got left at the end will be for any questions that you might have or thoughts that have come up or any scenarios that you might be facing that you think, actually, I could really do with a bit of help on this. Again, remembering that it is a recorded session, so please only ask questions or share information that you are happy to be recorded and shared out with everybody who registered. So again, if you've got anything specific, feel free to send me either a direct anonymous message in the chat, or you can contact me separately and we can have a proper conversation one-to-one. So, like I said, we've got 45 minutes. We've got 5 top tips. I've got 2 polls that I will run, one at the start and one at the end. And if you have got questions as we go through, feel free, you can drop them in the chat, which I shall open, because there's no point me telling you that you can do that if I've not got it there. You can drop them in the chat and we'll pick them up as we go, because I know sometimes when things are at the forefront of mind, it's easiest to just write them down and get them out. If you're someone that prefers to come off mute and ask your question properly, like with your voice, I'm happy for you to do that too, and that doesn't bother me at all. So I'm perfectly welcoming of anybody that wants to do that. Again, remembering that it's recorded. For those of you that are happy with your camera on, thank you very much, because for me, it gives me the opportunity to feel like I'm speaking to a human person. So I really enjoy that. So that makes my experience good. But there is no requirement for anybody to do that either. So if you're kind of eating your lunch or doing something in the background, because I know that we tend to multitask on these things, I'm perfectly okay with that too. So you can keep your cameras off. It makes no difference to me. But again, thank you to those of you that have got them on, because at least I can feel like I'm interacting with someone. So that's my fun. Auto-generated captions are available within Zoom. It will be one of the options, probably on the More button. So if you are in an environment where you would like to kind of read along what is being said, so you can turn the volume down, totally okay. You can enable that for yourself. But I would just like to say I am not responsible for the accuracy. So whatever comes out on there, it wasn't pre-programmed by me. It is whatever Zoom has transcribed. And I apologize in advance if it gets it wrong. And as I said before, the slides and the notes and the recording will be shared with you afterwards. So hopefully that gives you all a bit of an outline as to how we will run things for the next 40 minutes. Does anybody have any questions or anything they need before we kick off? Super duper. Thank you. Okay, so brief overview quickly of who I am for those of you that are not familiar. My name is Katie Allen. I use the pronouns she and her, and I'm essentially an inclusion consultant and workplace trainer, which means I come along in-house to organisations or online. I deliver workshops and webinars just like this that we're going to be doing today. I also run leadership development programs when it comes to inclusion confidence and one-to-one coaching for people who want to kind of explore things in a bit more depth and they don't necessarily want to do their learning publicly. I've also started now offering fractional Chief Diversity Officer services. So if you don't have the kind of time and resources to have a full-time headcount for someone to come in and join your executive team to do this sort of work, I offer those services too. So I can come along and give you strategic advice as to what you might be doing in your organisation. And I'm also a keynote speaker and I host the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. And I will give a shameless plug to that as well in the notes that I send through to you afterwards, because I think it's brilliant. And I would really love it if you would like to listen along. So I'll share that with you too. But like I said, I'm not here to sell me. We're all here to talk about difficult conversations. And in preparing for this, I was kind of thinking, like, what are the types of difficult conversations that tend to come up for us? Because they're really kind of varied. And I was trying to put my organisational brain on to look through this lens, because I thought that's probably going to be more appropriate. So these were some of the scenarios that I was coming up that actually, whether as leaders or line managers or HR people, we go into these conversations and they're usually a bit like, oh God, I'd really rather not be having this conversation. So that for me is any conversation that you can't just kind of show up and think, yeah, okay, I've got this. Anything that gives us a bit of a, oh, I'm going to have to give this person some bad news, or I'm going to have a conversation about someone's performance or their behavior. And, you know, if we might be facing a disciplinary process, how do I know that I'm really addressing things in the right way? So these were the types of there she is. These were the types of conversations that I was thinking of. And then I kind of settled on finally any form of feedback, because any conversation that kind of feels like it might start with, can we have a conversation about feedback, is probably going to be a difficult one. So these were what were in my mind when I was putting this together. So like I said, I've got 2 polls that I'd like to run today. So I'm going to kick the first one off now. And the question I would like to ask of you, please, is as your starting point coming into this session, how much do you already consider your biases and how they might shape your conversations ahead of going into them? So I'm thinking, before you start a conversation, how much do you consider the role that your biases play in this? Because this is really useful for me to gauge a starting point. And I'll leave that open for a few minutes while you chat away. Teapot has never considered her biases in her life, quite frankly. She doesn't need to. She's a cat. Okay, so I think we're probably about there. So most people, I will end the poll now and share those results. Okay, so most people are kind of in that middle saying, I'm really aware of my biases and I do my best to catch them when I remember, which I think is probably quite common across society, really, isn't it? We know that these things exist. If it's brought to our attention, we can probably go, oh yeah, I can see that now. But actually, it's not something that we generally keep at the forefront of our mind. And thank you for those of you that said, actually, you know, I'm aware that biases do exist, but I don't actually stop and think about them. And I applaud you on your honesty for that, because that, again, I think is probably a lot of people where we know it's a thing, but then we just get on with our lives, don't we? We just have stuff that we have to do. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to revisit this poll at the end, and we're going to see if we have changed any of our thinking with that. So let's kick it straight off then. 5 top tips that we're going to get through in probably about the next 20 minutes. So number 1 is understand your own frame of reference. And what I mean about this is we all have an individual frame of reference. Okay, and a frame of reference is simply the way that I see the world, my experiences to date. So the life that I've lived, the beliefs that I hold, the values that are important to me, all of these things shape my view and perspective of the world. So that is my frame of reference. So if we were to think about it as a map, this is the map of the area that I live in, the thing that I understand. And this is our kind of default setting almost when we think about having conversations or making decisions. Like, we get it, we understand it, that's our position. But this is also the place that our assumptions are built from. And it can be quite easy for us to think that everybody else has the same reference points, so the same frame of reference as we do. Like, it's kind of just our natural setting to think, well, I know this to be true. It's true in my world. It must be the same for everybody else, right? And the trouble is, when we're preparing to have difficult conversations, these assumptions that come from our frames of reference really need to be examined, because those are the moments when we have to stop and ask ourselves, okay, but what if that's not true? What if somebody else has had different life experiences, or they have a different belief system to me? How differently might they be coming into this conversation with me? So I might be coming in thinking, like, this is an absolute certainty. I will be able to explain how I see this situation. If it's a behavior at work problem, you're trying to have a conversation with someone, I can see why this behavior is problematic. I can explain that to somebody. They're going to understand it and it will change. But if someone else has a different frame of reference to you and they're coming into this conversation and you're going to deliver something to them as if it's just a given, as if it's obvious, it might not land so well. So we have to stop and think, well, okay, I understand my frame of reference. What exists for people who are outside of that? And we then have to be ready to hear something, so to really listen and consider things that we might not be familiar with. So during those conversations, what are the topics that people are bringing to us, and how are we making sure that we're not just responding from our own frame of reference? How are we kind of building in, okay, this is what somebody else has experienced in life, and I need to maybe play that back and keep that in my own mind. And because that kind of active listening and being open to allowing different information in, that's the piece that is then critical when we want to deconstruct those biases and really have empathetic conversations. And that's where we're actually able to understand where somebody else is coming from. And being prepared and doing some questioning of your frame of reference ahead of time, so thinking about those assumptions that you might have made in reaching your conclusions, that's the key piece then to being able to regulate your own responses. So when I think about the emotional responses that we might have in a difficult conversation, if someone raises something that we weren't prepared for, it can catch us off guard, and it might mean that we double down with the thing that we were saying, or we are less open to hearing somebody else's perspective. So that resistance, that defensiveness can come in. But if we've done a little bit of work to look at our frame of reference up front, we're ready for that. So even if it's not something we'd considered, we've started to pre-prime. Can you pre-prime, or do you just prime? We've primed our brains. We're going to pre-prime and prime our brains with that ability to hear something different. So we're less likely to get defensive or feel, kind of resistance. So that means we're then more likely to have a higher rate of positive outcomes. Is everyone following me so far? Awesome stuff. So let's put this into a real world example. I would like you, everybody, please, to meet Sam. So Sam is a person on your team, and you have noticed that Sam is struggling with a new process, but everybody else in your team seems to be picking it up with no problems. So you've noticed that Sam keeps going back to the old way of doing things, and she is getting increasingly frustrated and even a little bit angry when people in the team try to help her do it in the new way, and she's just not having it. So you are preparing to have a conversation with Sam about their declining performance and this kind of worsening attitude towards the team. What assumptions might you be making about Sam that you need to consider ahead of having that conversation? What do you think? Again, feel free to drop it into the chat or to just open it up. If I share some of the things that I was thinking in coming into this, so one of the things, if we think purely about process, has Sam identified a flaw in our process that actually could be addressed and could make things easier, right? It could be as simple as there's actually something we've completely missed in a process. It might not even be to do with a personality. It could just be actually she's found something and we're not giving her time and space to explain what that might be. So we could be making an assumption about the process. Or we could be making an assumption about Sam. Sam could be neurodivergent, and Sam might need a bit more time, a bit more involvement in the creation of a new process, especially if it's one that impacts their workflow, so that they can get on board with it and so that they can understand why something is changing. Or if this is a new we know it is a new process, it's a different way of processing information that has been presented to Sam, and if she hasn't been involved in the creation of that, could it be something that if Sam has something like dyslexia or dyscalculia, that there is actually something fundamental in that process that Sam's really struggling with, but she doesn't know how to articulate it? Or could something have changed significantly for Sam at home with regards to their kind of their well-being or their health, and they're actually trying to keep up with multiple changes happening in multiple different aspects of their life, and it's all just getting a bit overwhelming, which is making her a bit snappy. So there are all these different things that could exist out of the frame of reference that we have, which is we've got this amazing new process. Sam's not really getting on board. She's a bit of a problem. We need to have a chat about that. There could be all these different things happening that we need to stop and just revisit and think, okay, what's going on for Sam? How do we make sure we're having space for that conversation? So the top tip here is about understanding your frame of reference and how that might be different to somebody else's experience, and what do you need to listen for, and what questions do you need to ask to make sure that you're including the frames of reference that exist outside of the ones you're familiar with. Okay, top tip number one. Top tip number two. There is no such thing as normal. Okay, now some people are fine with this as a statement. Some people find it quite challenging, but bear with me. There is no such thing as normal. There is only what we have normalized. Okay, so this is a build on these assumptions and on our frames of reference. If you think about it, back in the day, we as humans used to think that the sun orbited the earth, right? We used to think the earth was flat. At one point, it was widely accepted that women shouldn't vote and they shouldn't have their own bank accounts. All of those things were normal, right? And I think nowadays we're a bit like, okay, none of those things are true, none of those things are acceptable. But all that happened is that was just a way of life that we had normalized. So everything we do, we accept as normal until we learn something else, and then we go, oh yeah, that's different. And then we do that repetitively, and then that becomes normal. So there is no such thing as normal. So what I would like to ask of you is, when you're going into your conversations, how do you view things within the context of your organizations that are normal within your teams, normal within your workplace, that perhaps we should be questioning? Might there have been a time where every man was supposed to come to work in a tie and a jacket and a suit, even in the height of summer, and you would have to swelter, right? Maybe you still do. But actually now attitudes have shifted quite a lot, and we've changed the way that we view professionalism at work when we show up, right? It's a very different animal now. So what attitudes does your workplace have around what is considered professional or unprofessional? And how do they shape the way that people experience your workplace? So if you were giving a teammate feedback on professionalism, did you think about, have you ever thought to stop and think about what is shaping those expectations that you are placing on that person of what professionalism is? Does that make sense? So the thing that we view as professional will just be the thing that we've normalized. How are we challenging that? So please meet Laura. Laura is autistic. Laura will frequently speak her mind in quite a direct manner, and she doesn't tend to engage in the usual pleasantries and small talk that the rest of your team do. And your team are absolutely fine with this. In fact, you find it quite refreshing because you can just cut to the chase sometimes, and you haven't got a faff about, and you can get things done. And you actually really like Laura's ability to speak up and say what everybody else is thinking, but they don't always have the confidence to say out loud. So she's just going to call it how it is. But you've had feedback from a senior leader in your business that sometimes she comes across as aggressive in presentations, and they would like to ask you to ask her to tone it down a bit and be more professional. What questions do you need to ask of yourself and your wider organization about what has been normalized within your place of work? So what reflections do you think you might want to be thinking about the assumptions you've made there? So some of the reflections I was thinking were, how, in this particular example, how are we making our views of professionalism inclusive of people of all neurotypes? Yes, definitely, Sarah. Sorry, Sarah's dropped in the chat there the generational differences in terms of how we define things. Exactly, because different generational groups will have experienced work in very different ways, won't they? So we have all got, again, coming back to our frame of reference, we have normalized our experience as the experience, but it's not necessarily true. So yeah, generations definitely one to be thinking about. And then yeah, and how are we thinking about the way in which we convey that to people of all different neurotypes, and also how we invite people to feed back to us on that when it doesn't work for them. Like, how are we managing those expectations? Have we questioned how many people are using energy in our workplace to like present themselves in a certain way to appear professional because of the standards that we've put out there, but actually using that energy to mask is really taking away from their capacity to do their job? So how are we making people work harder if the feedback we did give to Laura here was actually, we need you to be different? If we're asking her to change herself, what impact does that have on her performance or on her confidence?
Katie, I was just
Yes.
going to say that's it's kind of made me think also about the fact that there's two different frames of reference going on there, because someone else is asking you to say to deal with something,
Yeah,
and they don't have the same frame reference as you because they don't understand the situation in the same way that you do.
exactly.
There's that all
Perfect.
that
Yeah,
really difficult dynamic, isn't there,
yeah,
about being asked to do something and then having to respond to that or deal with it. You've got a choice there. Do you do what they're asking you to do, or do you go, no, actually I understand what's going on here, and yeah, I don't quite
yeah.
know what the answer
No,
is there,
perfect. And that's exactly it, isn't it? It's these multiple spheres of difficult conversation, because you have got, well, there's definitely going to be at least one difficult conversation, isn't there? Which is, how do I feed back to the senior leader that I've got this person in my team and everything's working pretty well?
Yeah.
And here are the reasons why Laura is the way that Laura is, and we're fine with it. Or, what other conversations need to happen? Because then, like you say, you've also then got your senior leaders frame of reference. So are they seeing something that you don't?
Mm-hmm.
So then how are we kind of stepping over to be in their shoes to think, okay, they view it in a certain way. Is there something specific that actually took place that we need to understand, or is it a generalized statement? So how do we then take that other step back and think about that?
Can I say, Katie,
Mm,
um, maybe also need to question why she was aggressive in the presentation. Perhaps that director was incorrect in their behaviour towards her, which is what preempted her to behave like that. And it could have nothing to do with her personality type or challenges, and it might actually be the way that they are.
yeah, absolutely. Because again, if we loop back to that frame of reference piece that Joe just mentioned there, is that senior leader behaving in a way that is actually quite triggering for Laura? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then again, more multiple spheres of difficult conversation that have to happen. So it's really about, how do we unpack each of those, and how are we assessing the assumptions and the normalizing of, if this senior leader believes they can just say something and they're going to be, they're going to be believed that it's true. Well, Laura probably has a perspective, you probably have a perspective, and how to bring all of those things together. One of the things as well that popped up for me is, would the word aggressive be used as a term of feedback if Laura was a man, or if Laura was racialized as white? There are other aspects here as well to also be thinking about. So to build on your point there, Anna, and thank you very much for making it, there is definitely a conversation to be understood about, was Laura's behavior aggressive, or was that just something that we have assigned a word to? And actually, what was the reason, what was the situation that took place that led to that feedback? So how are we understanding that? Yeah, and what levels of bias are at play within there? Yeah. So Katie's dropped a question in. So how to manage different people's perception bias? Yes, and have the best possible end results for all involved. Compromise is needed for multiple sides. Absolutely, yeah. And it really, and this is why it's all about the conversation, and it is all about that emotional regulation, knowing that we can go into a conversation where we can ask questions and we can encourage people to share honestly. Well, how have you arrived at where you've arrived at? And how can we explore that without it immediately being, okay, this is a feedback conversation I have to have. So what are all the multiple layers that are existing in there? So yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, so they were kind of my thoughts on that as well. So actually, how are we thinking about the way that different neurotypes take play? How are we thinking about the different roles, levels of power and hierarchy that are in here? How are we managing that? How are we thinking there might be some gender challenges in there? There might be some racialization challenges in there. How are we thinking about all of these things and the way that they could shape where that conversation could go, or if that conversation takes place in the form that the senior leader asked for it to take place at all? So, reminder of the top tip then, there is no such thing as normal. We have only normalized something, which means it becomes widely accepted as part of our, so in this context, our cultural norms in our business or our behaviors and our ways of thinking. And how are we becoming receptive to challenge that before we just take action? And given that, you know, as we've said, thank you, Sarah, for raising about the generational piece, if we know that teams will be growing, changing, developing, new team members will come in, how do we review those norms when one of those dynamics changes, so that we don't just rely on that old adage of, oh, because we've always done it that way, right? Because it's always been that way, because we've always had that thing. So how are we really thinking outside of that? Is there anything anyone would like to add onto kind of normalization before we move on to top tip number 3? Awesome stuff. Okay, so tip number 3, in a very similar vein, our brains love shortcuts. Okay, I read some research. There was a book called Strangers to Ourselves, and it's by Timothy Wilson. And in here, he states from his research that our conscious brains, so our kind of waking, thinking, conscious brains, process about 40 bits of information per second. And I thought that was quite a lot, until he then stated that our unconscious brains process about 11 million bits of information per second, right? So our brains are busy. Okay, they are very busy making sure that they are controlling our mental and physical ability. So they're making us breathe, they're beating our heart, it's regulating our temperature, it's regulating our hormones, or in my case, sometimes less so. And it's doing all of that stuff in the background. And then it's also trying to keep our minds busy. So our brain is constantly burning calories and looking for shortcuts for places where it doesn't have to expend energy. So it's going to conserve energy wherever it can. So our brains are hardwired to take the path of least resistance as a survival skill. Okay. And this also then comes up when we think about the people we surround ourselves with. Often we surround ourselves with people who are most like us, because our brain has been sort of pre-regulated to think, you look like me, sound like me, share the same beliefs as me, you're probably safe. Brilliant. So we make all of these shortcuts as a survival skill. Unfortunately, while sameness does equal comfort because we use less energy to process, that's when confirmation bias starts to show. Okay, so, you know, we basically think and assume that other people who are like us, share the beliefs as us, and see the world the way that we do, are just like us. So we're more likely to want to include them, and we're going to look for this evidence that their beliefs are the same as our beliefs, and we reconfirm that. So when we expect something to be true, we feel more content than when we expect things that are going to challenge us. So we are constantly seeking that reassurance of sameness because it's less challenging. So when things are outside of our frame of reference, we can sometimes then start to rely on stereotypes to help us fill in the blanks. So if I meet somebody who I know nothing about, my brain's going to start thinking, do I try and find reference points for everything I could possibly know about all people who are different than me? Or am I going to summarize a few key things that this person has presented me with? I'm probably going to find a stereotype about them, and I'll use that to decide how I feel about them. And sadly, all of this is going to go on without my conscious mind kicking in, because that's still trying to process 40 bits of information while everything else is going on in the background. So we make all of these decisions about other people, and about what they may or may not need, or who they are, without even involving them. So when we start to think about this in terms of a conversational perspective, who are the people that you are making decisions about, that you are thinking about, who you may or may not be involving? What assumptions are you making because your brain is just looking for information that reconfirms what it already knows, when you make decisions and when you go into these difficult discussions? I know for a fact that there are organizations out there who have created processes and policies for their businesses using ChatGPT, right? Because it's quick and it's easy and it's just going to deliver you a beautiful template. But all that's doing is farming a whole bunch of information of things that are already out there. And you're going to read that and think, that looks good, let's do that. And an example there has been, I know someone that created a gender transition support policy using ChatGPT. But they did not reach out and contact anybody who had been through the process of gender reassignment or gender transition. So how do they know in practice that the policy for support that they've put in place is actually applicable to the people that they're trying to support? So we're always looking for these shortcuts. So when it comes to having difficult conversations, how are we challenging ourselves about the kind of the stereotypes that we might be falling back into just because our brain thinks it knows something that may or may not be true? And the real world example I'd like to drop in here, this is Jax. Jax is somebody you have recently recruited. They will be joining your team as a new team member, and they are non-binary. So as a team leader, you need to inform your team about your new recruit. What conversations do you think you need to have? And that's conversations both with Jax and with your new team. So some of the thoughts that I were thinking were, we're probably going to be wondering, how will our new team adjust to using non-gendered language if that's not something that they're used to? So you might possibly want to have a conversation about that. How will you handle any instances of misgendering that likely will happen, depending on who your team are, and you would know your team best? And how will your team feel about that? And how will Jax feel about that? So there are several levels of conversation to be having there, as well as then revisiting what policy changes might need to take place, or language changes within some of the documents you already have, that if you haven't already addressed those kind of things, that will be in place in order to support Jax when they join your organization. And if you're going to make those changes, who else could be impacted by the result? Not just Jax or your team members, but who more widely is going to be impacted? So all of a sudden, we've gone from one conversation where I wonder how my team would think about it if we hire somebody who's non-binary, to, wow, there's a lot of things to think about here. So how are we catching all of those instances that might crop up when we think about the first conversation that we might be stepping into? So Joe has dropped in the chat, we also look for shortcuts in life in general because we're so busy, and then that results in making quick and often incorrect assumptions. Yeah, absolutely. And we do. And 9 times out of 10, maybe we get away with it, right? Maybe we make these shortcuts and something happens a bit further down the line and think, oh gosh, yeah, I didn't think about that. That was close, right? But it happens. So we have to just get into the habit of really stopping. And this is when we asked that poll at the beginning as well. Like, we know biases exist, but we don't create that pause moment to step into, to just be, let me think about this. Let me think about, what assumptions am I making? What shortcuts might I be taking? How might I only be seeing this through the lens of me and my team? What could the wider implication of this be, if anything? So how are we really kind of creating that moment of calm just to go, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to skip on to point number 4.
Sorry, Katie, just very quickly.
Sorry, yes, Sarah.
With that one, it's the balance between the needs of Jax, your team, and the wider organisation as well. It's not just focusing on one element of it.
Completely,
or
yes.
one individual or section of it. And that I think is where a lot of people potentially come unstuck, because then they try to please or address everything without ending up addressing anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, completely. And sometimes when we kind of zoom out like that, it can feel quite overwhelming. And then again, then our brain gets into kind of that fight or flight mode where it's just like, you know what? Maybe it's all going to be okay. And we'll just wait until someone tells us it's a problem. Which then becomes that defensive response rather than stopping and creating a space to say, let's have a conversation about this with the people who needs to be involved to help us make the best decision that we can think about. And this is what I want to talk about then with strengthening networks, right? Because if our brains love shortcuts and we tend to gravitate to people who see the world the way that we do, who are we surrounding ourselves with to help us make the best decisions, to help us challenge our biases, to help us challenge the assumptions that we might be making? Because if we're not actively including people who see the world differently to us or might have differing opinions, that can really limit the usefulness of the advice that we can give to people, or the conversations that we have, or the challenge that we can receive when we're preparing for a difficult conversation. Because I mean, I know full well I've done this too, right? When I want to get feedback from someone, I'll have someone who is a really good mentor or someone who's given me really great advice in the past, so I'll keep going back to them, but all I'm constantly getting is their opinion, right? So my frame of reference is becoming their frame of reference. And I will probably actively, if I know someone, oh God, they're a bit difficult though. Oh, I know they're going to tell me things I don't want to hear. It's going to be a difficult conversation. I might not ask them. That's the person I probably should be asking. I should be stepping outside of that comfort zone and inviting somebody who could, we've all got one challenging person, haven't we? That we're just like, oh, do I got to talk to them? Yeah, probably, because actually you can still choose to not act upon the information they give you, but would you not rather know? Right? Would you not rather have that information? So in the real world example, I would like, please, for you to meet you. And I would like you to think about yourself in this and really question, when you think about the people that you go to for help and advice, who are the mentors for you? Who are the people that give you guidance? How varied and diverse are those perspectives that you seek? Or are you just speaking into an echo chamber and hearing, confirmation bias again, hearing information coming back to you that you already knew was true, and that makes you feel good, like we're making a good decision, they're telling me the things that I believe to be true? How are we making it a little bit more challenging for ourselves? And also question, when was the last time that you didn't follow the guidance you were given? And what was it that made you do that as well? Because sometimes that can be really telling. When did someone give you some information? You're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. Is that coming from a place of bias, or was that coming from a place of recognizing, I've heard that before, I'm going to do something different? Like which way did it go for you? Yeah, and then what stops you from asking people that might give you an answer you don't like, and what would happen if you did ask them? Because again, remember, if we only go to the same people or person for the same help, then we're just going to get the same answers that we already know. And there's also this thing called attribution bias, which is where we kind of see certain behaviors and certain kind of aspects as good, and we assign that label of good to a certain person, and then everything that person tells us, we're going to think, well, they're great, they know what they're doing. And you're treating kind of the good advice and the behavior that you've had in the past now as that person, and everything that then comes after, you're like, well, they're brilliant, they know what they're talking about, of course. Which is why I'm also asking you, and I'm telling you all of this, also be critical of what I'm saying. Like that's totally okay too. Go away and make up your own mind. Exercise that amazing brain you've got that processes all of that information for your own capacity for critical thinking. I'm going to jump onto the fifth and final tip very quickly now. So this is more of a life statement that I like to throw out there, please, because getting things wrong does not make you a bad person. Okay, we live in this world that absolutely favors certainty and these kind of binary thinking outcomes, like it's going to be right or it's wrong, it's good or it's bad, it's this or it's that. Like we love a polarized outcome. But as humans, we are really complicated and we are messy. And actually, all of these conversations, the best ones happen in that middle messy grey area. Okay, we like to think that there's only one version of the truth, but actually, as we've identified going through these examples, everybody's truth is their truth, and somewhere in the middle are all of those perspectives that you can bring together to create the best outcomes for those difficult conversations that you need to have. But we're all going to come into it thinking, well, this is the truth. This is the one truth. I've normalized this through my own frame of reference. And actually, we need to start questioning that. We need to start taking a step back and thinking, okay, if we, like a Venn diagram, if we all bring these things together, what sits in the middle that we can agree on and we can use to move forward? And how do we have more conversations to bring more information into that? And I know, obviously, we all want difficult conversations to go well, but they are an opportunity for learning and for growth as well. So in order to, to see the world from somebody else's frame of reference, we also have to know that it is okay to be wrong. Like, it is okay to change your mind, especially when the stakes are high. Because if you are in that space where you're willing to really listen and hear where someone else is coming from, you are way more likely to make better outcomes and better decisions as a result of that. So focus on having a positive, productive conversation rather than just getting an outcome, and that will make a difficult conversation way more easier for you. And don't feel so wedded to your identity being linked to the outcome. Like, you can have a conversation can go completely sideways. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just means maybe you weren't as prepared as you could have been, or maybe there was something that you overlooked. Okay, so give yourself permission to listen and understand, challenge and be challenged, and you'll probably get out the other side okay. So top tips, the 5 that I've just given you are: understand your own bias, please, because remember, we all have biases. So wherever you're starting from, whatever your frame of reference is, that's your place. And then use that to really understand how you interpret the actions of other people based upon what you have normalized. Then you get to select how you feel about that. And you can recognize when your brain is making shortcuts because you've got an affinity with somebody or you share something similar with them. So your brain's going, yep, tick, 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 that works for me. Then strengthen your networks, because the people who are around you are the people that will give you more information. So you can use those networks so that you are really kind of challenging yourself and making sure that you are trying to consider as many angles as possible. And then know that at some point you're going to get things wrong. Like, you will, but it's okay. Like, it's actually totally okay. And getting things wrong doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you a human. It means you made a mistake. So difficult conversations, they require the kind of self-awareness. They require you to make mistakes as part of your learning. And yeah, how you think will shape how you lead. So I'm conscious we are at time now. So for those of you that are still here and are able to read, I just want to run this very quick poll once again, just to see how you are feeling now we have done this. So I'll just pop that up just for a few seconds for those of you that are still able to be here, because it'd be really good for me to understand how much easier, now you've kind of heard some of this, will it be able you to just take a minute and pause and just see what it is that you could do. Awesome. Just give it a couple more seconds. Excellent. Thank you. So thank you so much, everybody. A lot of you have said that you have learned something, so that's great. That was my point for this. I'd like it for someone to go away and say, yeah, I've learned at least one thing that I can put into practice. So thank you so much. And I appreciate anything that you then try from this point on. That works for me. So thank you. Thank you. The final thing that I said I was going to just pop up here is, if you do have a specific question or anything that you want addressing, you can scan this QR code. There will also be a link in the slides that come out for you to book a call with me if there is something in more detail you want to talk through. So if you've got a specific example that you're like, yeah, I don't need to share this in a room full of people, but I'd like to get your take, feel free to do that. You can book a 30-minute call using that link, no problem. And I will stop sharing just so I can see those of you. Hello. So thank you for coming along and spending this time with me. I know it was a real whistle stop, rapid fire list of information, but I'm very grateful to you being here. I'm going to hang around if anybody wants to stay on just to ask a question or kind of chat about anything. But for those of you, I thank you. If you have to leave, thank you for being here. You will get a copy of the recording, you will get a copy of the slides and the notes that I've taken, and I've got a little one-page PDF that I've created for something else, which I'm going to pop over for you as well, because I am the gift that keeps on giving. So thank you very much for your participation, everybody.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Jo.
Thank you, Katie.